Hello, welcome back to Theater Journal Shorts. I'm here today with Sunmin Kim to discuss her recent article, Leaning into the Sky, Gestures of Grief and Futurity in Operation Babylift, which appears in Theater Journal Volume 76, Number 4, out in December 2024. Hello, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for so much for having me.
Really excited to dive in and talk about your recent article published in Theater Journal. So, to begin, could you give our viewers a brief summary of the topic of the article and your main argument?
Yeah, so I'll try my best, but very um, basically, my article is about Operation Babylift, which was a military evacuation operation at the end of towards the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, facilitated by the US, where thousands of South Vietnamese quote unquote orphans. Some of them were not orphans, but thousands of children were evacuated, airlifted out of South Vietnam, and then directly adopted into Western families, mainly in the United States and Australia. So my article looks at, kind of takes this moment and examines it through history, but also through these objects, such as these like photographs, but also a documentary that comes out kind of many years after of a baby lift refugee who is now grown up, who then goes back to Vietnam to reunite with her biological family. So that documentary is called Daughter from Da Nang. So my article kind of triangulates the history of Operation Babylift, the photographs, and then this documentary. Um, so what I try to do is, and I'll try to explain this in two parts. So my first part of the article is really interested in understanding the complicated subjectivity that is born from this operation. So what does it mean to be rescued? But also, this rescue means that a complete rupture from your homeland, from your family, against your will, actually. There's no kind of like consent happening because children are seen as like not being able to consent. They need to be evacuated immediately. So the first part is I try to be very attentive to the violence of the operation, right? The kind of social death that happens, but also the violence of being kind of shuffled around, bodies being shuffled around, papers being lost, identities being lost, kind of being stored like cargo, the kind of physical dangers of like evacuation, but also, so it tries to be very attentive to that violence, but also very attentive to the possibility of more than violence. So my argument is that we need to understand Operation Babylift as both life-ending but life-giving. And life-giving, and that we need to hold this together. And this is where the framework of militarized care comes through, and the body really comes to the center, which is to say that both violence and care can be felt simultaneously, and it sometimes indistinguishably on the body, right? So in this operation, yes, we have the violence, but we also have these children being swaddled, being fed, being held, being carried, being played with, and essentially being kind of rescued and kind of airlifted as a kind of care, which I'm even careful to say out loud, right? I don't want to, this article is by no means trying to kind of uphold the operation as something good. But what I'm asking is that we don't foreclose the possibility of something more than violence that happened in this operation. So that's the kind of first part. The second part then looks at the kind of afterlife of the operations through Heidi Bubb in the documentary that I mentioned. The way that the documentary ends is that Heidi kind of goes through this return trip to Vietnam, hoping for a happy reunion, hoping for a kind of repair, but then doesn't quite find that. And she feels very overwhelmed and incredibly sad about this, and on moves flies back to the US and describes her biological family as a relationship where she has closed the door but has not locked shut. So I really try to contend with this. Like basically, I'm asking like, what are the other possibilities that I can offer as a scholar, as a person who analyzes this? What are the other possibilities that we could kind of find where Heidi Bub can find repair, can find something more than this feeling of like quote unquote failure? So then. I argue that we look to the airplane, this moment, look to the flight, the moment of flight, where she is suspended, or these children are suspended between departure and arrival, as a critical moment of transformation that is both violent but potentially exceeds that violence. So I really look to the inside of the airplane in these photographs that document the inside of the airplane as and kind of look for and search for something more that could emerge. And the way that I do this, um, the end that I arrive at is this black and white photograph of children looking out. The refugee children are kind of lined up against the airplane wall, looking out the airplane window. And this is, for me, was a incredibly striking photograph. And what I do is I read these children's bodies and their positions inside the airplane as performative gestures, specifically kind of analyzing them leaning and looking out the window as performances that derive pleasure. So again, more than violence. So there is pleasure there, and they resist totalizing violence, and potentially search for reparative futures up there and out there in the sky in this act of looking out. And so, very succinctly, two sentences, my main arguments are that care and violence can be felt on the body simultaneously. So that's the framework of militarized care. And that the sky is a site of passage and transformation that could offer us more than violence. And this is, I will note that this is very much inspired by the way that Black Studies looks at the ocean passage in the history of the transatlantic slave trade, to think about, yes, the violence of the passage, but the potential for alternative ways of being and relating that emerge from that passage. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing all of that. I find that in particular, like the way that you're trying to nuance understandings of care in a war and militarized context on the bodies of children to be especially resonant with our moment in time right now, like terrifyingly so, but
Yeah.
also really appreciate that you're offering a way to think about that, that again isn't condoning the violence, but is also
Mhm.
trying to not foreclose horizons of potential for the people on whom the violent care is
Right.
enacted.
Mhm.
I think that's really, really important, especially at our moment right now. How did you come to this particular topic?
So this kind of goes all the way back to my undergrad, actually. I first watched Daughter from Da Nang, the documentary, in an undergraduate course in Asian American Studies. And I remember it left a really deep impression on me because of its ending, the way that it complicates our ideas of belonging and healing in a very kind of unresolved way. And so it left a deep impression on me then. And then in my first year of coursework in graduate school, I kind of vaguely remembered these photographs. And so I wrote a course paper on it. Um, I highly recommend you all to like search up more of these photographs because they truly are just like astounding. Um, and yeah, that kind of developed into a paper that then developed into this article.
Great. And how does it connect to your broader research? So maybe your dissertation project or, other, even broader than that, you might think about ongoing conversations in theater and performance studies. You mentioned inspiration from Black studies research and theory already.
hmm Yeah, so my broader research, as it is developing, is interested in the sky and the airplane. Essentially, I want to ask, how can we understand the sky and the experience of flight through airplanes as performative in shaping Asian American diasporic subjectivities? So, how are our bodies kind of undone and redone through flight? How they are created, become, and unbecome, etc., unraveled, etc. And this really stems from my own transnational upbringing. So I was born in South Korea, kind of immigrated to the US, but very frequently was flying back and forth between Korea and the US, probably once a year to this day. So growing up, I always thought that the airplane was a very interesting place. The inside of the airplane, this kind of, for me, like a 13-hour flight, as a site where very complicated feelings emerge around belonging, around citizenship, around nationality, around identity, and kind of very much in flux, very complicated feelings. And so as I held these feelings, I came upon this kind of rich scholarship and performances that think with the ocean, that think with ocean passages. And I really thought, wow, we can think with the ocean and think with this kind of embodied passage. And these amazing scholars like Edward Glissant, Christina Sharp have done so. And so then my thought was, okay, then why can't I apply this then to the sky and kind of flight? Because I really believe that, I mean, I think this is a reality, right? There is a contemporary generation of Asian diaspora that since the Civil War, I'm sorry, not since the Cold War, that emerged through flight, not through ocean passages, but actually through sky passage. And that continue to emerge as we see today through various means, through exile, through migration, immigration, etc. And so I'm really interested in looking at the sky as a site of passage and thinking about how it is profoundly unique from ocean passages, but also can draw from that scholarship as well.
That's great. That feels like something I resonate with really personally, but also I can see lots of interesting connections to things that have been going on in like film and media studies too, with interest in climactic media and atmosphere. And so, thinking on that level as well as the sort of impact on the body, it sounds like a fascinating project. I hope to hear more about how it develops as you work on that. One of our key audiences for these videos potentially are undergraduate students who might be watching this as a class assignment or assigned alongside your article. So, for that audience or those who don't know as much about the specific subject of your article, what would you say are some of the key takeaways that you'd like people to come away from reading or even just watching this video?
I guess so. The the thing that I want to, especially in this moment, right, where we are seeing the way that the militarized violence, but also care kind of coalesce on these bodies that are that perish, but are also are rescued. So this article is really about contending with that afterlife, right? So much of the media and public attention, global attention, happens in that moment of rescue, in that very dramatic, big moment of rescue. But then what actually happens to these people? What is like the consequence? What is the afterlife? What are the failures and what are the other potentials? So I guess my one thing that I want the students to take away is to pay attention to um, the before and after of that big moment, right? What happened before and then what happens after. And to take that seriously as a kind of like act of care. Um, yeah, so that's one. The other thing that I guess to the audience of like undergraduates who are potentially in like theater studies or performance studies, you'll notice that this is in theater journal, and there's no theater in my article. So that's to say that theater and performance studies can be a lens to look at other spaces, other bodies, other objects. And that's very much what I do with these photographs and thinking about Heidi Bubb. So that's another thing that I want people to take away. The last thing is in these kinds of in as you kind of move performance as a lens to other things. Um, I really want students to be open to very unexpected readings that can emerge. So, for example, when I was studying these photographs, especially the black and white photograph that I analyze, I was staring at it for so long. I looked at it was my computer background. I was looking at it for a very extended period of time. But at some moment, I noticed that their stomachs were leaning up against the airplane wall. And it's a very small gesture. And even though I had been looking at these photographs for a while, for some reason in that moment, um, it was very impactful for me. I was like, wow, this feels very important. And so I want students to be open to these unexpected readings, to be moved by these like very small gestures, and to kind of dig deeper into like, okay, like what makes this small gesture so important? How can small gestures be understood as important rather as opposed to these like kind of big gestures? Yeah.
That's a fascinating example. And I think also, like, in addition to that openness and curiosity that you're pointing to, the fact that you looked at the image so many times and for so
Mhm.
long, I think is a great reminder to all of us to really just slow down and let ourselves sit with objects and images as we're trying to unravel the complexities of what we're seeing and feeling as we engage with them. So thank you so much. Was there anything else you wanted to share with our audience before we finish?
I don't think so. I just want to say if you watched this video, thank you so much. And if you read the article, thank you so much. I'm really excited for people to be engaging with it.
Great. So for our viewers, just one more time, I'm here today with Sungmin Kim, who is a PhD student in theater and performance studies at Tufts University, and the article is Leaning into the Sky, Gestures of Grief and Futurity in Operation Babylift. That's out in the December 2024 issue of Theater Journal, Volume 76, issue number 4. Thank you again so much for joining me today, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much.